Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. This week, we're paying attention to the direction of Tropical Storm Erica to see if she turns towards the East Coast. But 10 years ago tomorrow, it was Hurricane Katrina that brought death and devastation to New Orleans and other areas along the Gulf Coast. Nearly 2,000 people died and hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. So what happened in the 10 years since Katrina? Are things back to normal? Are people back in their homes? Will life ever be the same? We'll talk with some survivors of Hurricane Katrina and get their perspectives. Another View is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
You need to be scared. You need to be concerned. And you need to get your butts moving out of New Orleans.
Last night, we began this broadcast saying Katrina was bad, very bad. Last night, we didn't know the half of it.
The lower 9th ward of the city is under 5 to 6 feet of water because 3 pumps failed.
I want to know what were they doing with all the money that they claimed they had for the pumps. They've been saying the big one for years, as long as I can remember. It finally happened, and we're in such disarray.
There are reports from New Orleans of people trapped in buildings that have come down around them. They have made desperate calls to 911 asking for help, asking for rescue.
People trapped, a lot of them hungry, don't have no water, need medicine. I need insulin right now.
Katrina exposed serious problems in our response capability at all levels of government. And to the extent that the federal government didn't fully do its job right, I take responsibility.
Some of the news coverage, and then Mayor Ray Nagin delivering the first ever mandatory evacuation order to the citizens of New Orleans. But for far too many people in that city, there was nowhere to go and no way to get there. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Tomorrow marks the 10th year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a storm that wreaked havoc on the Gulf Coast, particularly the city of New Orleans, and in its aftermath taught this nation lessons on race and poverty, but also on compassion and action, as people all over the U.S. and the world came together to help those who lost everything in this storm. Today, we're talking with some survivors of Hurricane Katrina. Please welcome Michelle Peters. She and her husband were forced to leave their home in the lower 9th ward of New Orleans 10 years ago. How you doing, Michelle?
I'm doing okay.
Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. Jeremy Dillon, who was 14 when Katrina hit, and he's now a 24-year-old student at ODU. Hi, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. And Reverend William Tyree III, who is pastor of First Baptist Church, Berkley, a church that was instrumental in helping families relocate after Katrina. And in full disclosure, Reverend Tyree is my pastor. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today, Barbara?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
But first, I want to start with what happened to New Orleans Councilman James Gray. 10 years ago, Councilman Gray was a private citizen, but what he encountered on the day of Katrina and the years to follow would motivate him to run for office. He recently shared his personal accounts of how this violent storm impacted his family, the lower 9th ward, and the city of New Orleans.
My wife and daughter, of all things, were on a cruise in the Gulf of Mexico. Communications was destroyed, so there was at least a 20-hour period where I didn't know where they were, and the last place they were was in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, sharing space with Katrina. They ended up getting diverted to Houston and flying into Baton Rouge. I had made a decision I would evacuate, even though I'm one of those people who, for many storms, did not evacuate. But because my mother-in-law was with me, she's not from Louisiana, she was a little frightened by the storm, I had agreed to evacuate. And after the storm, the first response was we got lucky again. It was not a big storm. There was a little wind damage, but no serious damage. Everything was okay. And one of my friends left his house where the streets were dry and drove about 2 miles to his brother's house. When he left his brother's house to come back, he saw water in the street. And actually, we talked on the cell phone, and he said, James, this is the strangest thing going on. There's water in the street. There was none there this morning, and it's not raining. I don't know where this water is coming from. What he didn't know and what I didn't know at that moment is the levee had broken. In my neighborhood, the water in the streets was probably 8 to 9 feet deep. And my house, as most of my neighbors' houses, were totally destroyed. My daughter and son and I went to my house for the first time without my wife. We salvaged everything we thought we could salvage, and we brought it to my wife in a handbag. And when we got back, she said, where's my stuff? And I handed her a handbag. My wife said, James, she was not serious. The only thing we could salvage was jewelry, which was unaffected by the water. When the storm pushed a 20-foot wall of water into the city and the levees broke, and that water was able to come into the lower 9, New Orleans East, and other areas, a land almost built for water just couldn't take what we got that day.
Wow, Michelle, I look at your face as you listen to his story. It brings back memories.
A lot of memories.
So tell us what first, before you even tell us what happened on that day of Katrina, what was your life like in New Orleans before then? Because you were born and raised there.
Well, I had a pretty stable life. It's all my family was there. I've been living there all my life. Mm-hmm. So we went through Bessie. Then after that, the years went on, and then.
So you have been through several hurricanes.
Yes.
And people before Katrina pretty much rode those storms out.
Right.
Is that right?
Right, because we never had to move. Mm-hmm. We never had to go anywhere. We left for Bessie, mm-hmm. but coming through the years, they had a lot of hurricanes coming, and we never had to leave until later years. Then they was telling us to evacuate to leave. Mm-hmm. Now with Katrina, which myself, I think Reagan told us at the last minute to leave, because we could have gotten a lot of things to bring with us. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about material things. We could have got a lot of clothes and stuff like that. So,
so you don't think that you got enough notice?
No, I don't think we got enough notice.
In terms of being able to gather your things and get ready to leave.
Right, because what we took with us, it wasn't enough for us to, mm-hmm. have a lot of changing clothes. Mm-hmm. We used what we had, wash, put back on, mm-hmm. like that. So
tell us about that day. When did you decide to leave? What did you do?
We left that Sunday.
Okay. After the storm hit?
Before the storm hit.
Before the storm hit, okay.
We left that Sunday. And by the time the storm hit, we was already by my mother-in-law's house in Angel, Louisiana, because it's across the Twin Span.
Okay.
So after that, all we were saying what was going on, on the news, what was going on. And for once, with my nephew, he came to me and told us, we couldn't go back home. I said, boy, wait a minute. I said, we're going back home. We didn't figure we figuring we was going back home about Wednesday, mm-hmm. Thursday, something like that. But he said, no, Auntie, you can't go back home. I said, why? He said, because the Twin Spans has broken. So that means we couldn't get back home.
So you could not get
back
back
home.
Mm-hmm.
And then they wouldn't let nobody go in mm-hmm. until everything had to cool down and settle down, Mm-hmm. So it was devastating.
Did you have other family that stayed? Did anybody stay in New Orleans at that? At the time they weren't able to actually get out of the city.
No, everybody had gotten out, but some they was in the city, but they was at the Superdome.
So they went.
Some went to the Superdome. Mm-hmm. Then they had buses touring them other different places. Because my family, we all was scattered. Everybody was all scattered. We came up to Virginia. Mm-hmm. Some of my family went to Alexandria, Louisiana. My brothers went to Pensacola, Florida.
So everybody went.
Everybody went different ways. Mm-hmm.
Now, Jeremy, you were 14. Mm-hmm. What do you remember?
Well, I had just started school that week, And like when it got to like Thursday,
what grade were you in then?
I was in seventh.
Seventh grade.
Yeah,
okay.
Seventh.
Okay.
And we always just started like, and got to Thursday. My mom was telling me that there was a storm coming, and we went to a friend's house. We was in Gretna, like I think it was like 15 minutes away from New Orleans, whatnot. And like that night, I just hear a bunch of like rain coming down, and the next day, it's still like the wind is blowing, and like I see trees coming down, crashing, and I see the streets filling up with water quick. And then like the next day after Katrina was like all done doing all this thing, I walked outside and the street was like full of water, and like every other house besides ours was like damaged or gone. And like that night, I seen people like ready like to go out into like the stores across the street to like get like bread and milk and stuff like that. It wasn't open, but so they had to break in. And like it was like a lot of damage. The water came in the house. Just like it was a scary event basically.
Were you an only child? Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I'm an only child.
You're an only child?
Yeah.
So did you all have to go up higher in your house, or what did you do when the water started coming in?
The water was like, it was in the house to the point that it didn't get any higher in the house.
Okay.
And we was upstairs to sleep upstairs, but sleeping downstairs, everything got wet. So
that wasn't an option.
Yeah.
Were things floating?
Yeah. Like the carpet, because they had the carpet down, and the carpet was soaking wet, even in the kitchen. So you had to like, after the hurricane passed, we had to sweep the water out the house. Even after the day, it was still in the house.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. If you were living in New Orleans and you were relocated here to Hampton Roads, we'd love to hear your story. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Or if you were one of the many folks that went down to New Orleans to help with the recovery, if you would call us to tell us your story also. We'd love to hear from you. I want to try to get a sense from the two of you, because I think people, when we watched the pictures on television and we saw people floating, in the water, and we saw the boats and so forth, but can you describe, I don't know, the smell, the what the water was like? What was that feeling like for you all?
Well, we went down that January to go see our house and everything. We had to take shots because of the Earl spill and all that mixed with the water and all that. It stank. Our refrigerator was the freezer. The freezer was laying in the hall at my bedroom door, turned flat over. We don't know how it came out the utility room. The refrigerator was turned flat on its face. It was terrible. The smell, everything was all messed up. Ceiling fans hanging from a thread. Holes in the side of the wall. Everything was just turned over. Everything was just messed up. The furnitures. My son went down. They didn't want me to go, but I said, let me go so I could see. And he was telling me that somebody took the kitchen table. I said, Bob, what they going to do with the kitchen table? They can't do nothing with it. So when we went down, it was flat on the kitchen floor.
So it had gone through the kitchen floor?
It was just broken down to the floor.
Wow.
The water just took it, like the legs just off.
Just went off.
The cabinets, everything just tore up. The bed was turned. My bed was turned like it was cocked up. The clothes in the closet was on the floor. None but one coat was in that closet. A plaid coat, which I had some money in. And that was the only thing that was in that closet.
So how long had you lived in that home?
We stayed in that home for 20 years.
Did you want to rebuild?
We did, but coming from where we what we paid for our home was $42,500, it would have taken us 200 and something thousand to rebuild that house back. Mm-hmm. And then the insurance would have been higher. Mm-hmm. Okay. It wasn't no way we could do it. And from what I've heard, people was getting their houses renovated, and they had the contractors taking people money, not finishing their job. We wasn't gonna go through that. So when we was already up here, so we
well, what made you decide to come to Hampton Roads?
Well, my brother-in-law and his wife stays here, and they belongs to First Baptist South Hill, Reverend Tolliver. Mm-hmm. And Reverend Tolliver in the church, they asked, did you have any family members down in Katrina? Mm-hmm. And if they decide they want to come up here, let us know, and they'll put us up for 6 months. And we traveled up here and followed them. That's how we got up here.
Okay. Reverend Tyree, so First Baptist Berkley also got involved in terms of helping families relocate. What was the impetus? Was it because of families in the church itself, or was it just because you saw the devastation and knew you had to do something to help?
It was a combination of things, Barbara. Let me say first, certainly my heart goes out to those who were directly affected, whose lives have been displaced and futures permanently altered. I knew that there would be many people who would look at the storm of that magnitude and would surmise that this was an act of God. Mm-hmm. The God I serve is a God of compassion who works through people. We in this area are not too far removed from the events of Katrina, because if in our recent past down in Princeville, North Carolina, because of natural disaster, graves were unearthed. We had a team of people who saw and witnessed firsthand just the amount of devastation that could come through water damage, both loss of human life, the stench, the diseases that are prevalent and present, and just what it takes to rebuild. Mm-hmm. So there were several factors that were at work for us as a congregation. One was the reality that as a church, our life as a community of faith is manifested locally, even though we are part of a global community. Mm-hmm. And so there were brothers and sisters, men and women of faith, and certainly just human beings who needed to see the hand of God at work through people who have hearts of compassion.
Yes.
So we started by canvassing members of our congregation, and we did at that time have 2 families who were directly affected. One member of our congregation, her father and brother were living there, and in working through them, we were ascertaining what we could do to help, and they did not need any direct support from us. Mm-hmm. The other family had relocated to Houston, Texas, and they were doing well and did not need any direct support from us. That did not mean that those families did not need help, but they wanted to reserve those kind of resources who did not have any other means of help. Mm-hmm. So then we began to look at the fact that there were some students who were attending Norfolk State University as well as Hampton University who were from New Orleans, that when it hit, they had no place to go. Mm-hmm. They had no provisions for winter clothes. And so we became part of an effort to provide gift cards, both to Walmart and to Target, to furnish students with necessities for what they needed. Mm. Then we also recognized that there were some persons who were relocating to this area. Not quite sure whether or not they were efforts that individuals made themselves or if they were part of a government relocating, but there were some who came who needed some assistance. Mm-hmm. We had a dual response in that as some of those individuals were brought to our attention. We were able to help them with resources that they need, whether it was resources for them to have temporary housing location or other kind of human service resources. We also made some configuration changes to our facility with classrooms upstairs and a restroom that we converted to a shower facility to provide some sort of temporary housing in the form of maybe apartments should that need arise. We had the capability to do that, but no one ever took advantage of that. There were other places that they could stay and accommodate. In addition to supporting those churches that we were familiar with who were on the ground, and oftentimes what you see on the media and the images that you see and the communities that are affected, oftentimes the local church in disenfranchised communities has a better way of being assessed to see who is getting helped and who is not getting helped, and how we can best help those who are not getting help in a responsible way where there's accountability and where there are systems in place to do that.
So do you think, before I ask that question, Jeremy, why did you come to Hampton Roads?
Basically, when we was the friends that we staying with, they had family up here. So like, my mom was like, she saw that Katrina as she wanted to move, so she can like.
She saw that as an opportunity.
Yeah, opportunity to move. So she took me up here. When we got here, we stayed in the hotel for about maybe like 6 months maybe, and FEMA paid for it. I went to school to Norview Middle, and like they continued to pay for the hotel. And then like she got a job with Hall Hodges, and we got our own place, and we was under FEMA care no more.
One of the issues that everyone talks about was the issue of how the government responded and how long it took for the government to respond. And over the past 10 years, there have been many people who analyzed what they would have done differently to limit some of the tragic scenes that we saw on television and heard about. It's hard to forget the images of New Orleans residents trapped at the Superdome, the rooftop rescues from neighborhoods consumed by water, or the devastation that remained once the water receded. New Orleans Councilman James Gray shares his thoughts about how things were handled and what he would have done differently. Let's take a listen.
We had a plan that we didn't put in effect 10 years ago. We had an evacuation plan for the city that would have involved city buses, the rail system, taking people outside of the bowl toward Baton Rouge. She had a plan that would have moved all of the city's heavy equipment to La Place, and our government officials just didn't do it. It was a big mistake. Even after the flood, most of the people in this city didn't realize what a serious problem we had. There were men at a water pumping station on the West Bank. We were told that it was important to keep that station going because it was the only fresh water that was undamaged in the city. A number of us came with 2 truckloads of food and supplies to go to them to say, you need to stay here because what you're doing is important. And incidentally, we were able to drive into the city without getting our tires wet. We came up I-10 at 3:20. We went around the city and came in from the west. But as we approached the city, it was overcast and there were fires, and the cloud held the fires close to the ground. And it was the most eerie sight. It looked like a Batman movie set of Gotham City. It was dark and dingy with all this smoke. We were able to cross the bridge and come by the convention center where thousands of people were stranded and waiting for a way out. The convention center was dry. The French Quarter was dry. And here's the first big mistake made by government. The route we took, you could have put Greyhound buses through there and picked all those people up in the convention center the first day. Somehow that didn't happen. Somehow those people sat there at the convention center, no air conditioning, inadequate food and water, and you probably saw scenes all over national television of these desperate people at the convention center. Well, we drove by there that day without getting our tires wet. There were hundreds of buses parked in La Place that could have taken the same route we took and could have evacuated those people the first day. But somehow government couldn't get that right. And those buses parked in LaPlace, which is about 30 miles away, never came into the city. Let's go a little bit further. If you're from New Orleans, you might know that the Superdome is connected to the Hyatt Hotel, which was connected to an office building. You could walk from the Superdome. The Superdome had water around it, maybe 6 feet of water. But you could walk from the Superdome through the Hyatt, through that office building to Loyola Avenue. And on Loyola Avenue, the water was only about knee-deep. A Greyhound bus could have driven in that water. Those people could have all been evacuated the first day and could have driven out of the city. And the deepest the water ever would have been is the maybe knee-deep water that you would have had there on Loyola. But again, somehow the people making decisions didn't figure that out and left those people in the Superdome for far too long. The other thing about the Superdome, they had enough food to feed all those people for weeks. Somehow they didn't realize that or know it, so they were rationing food in the Superdome. And I guess they did that because they were afraid of running out of food. But this is the United States of America. We could have done airdrop of food and water if need be. It was insanity, but somehow the people in charge in that moment of disaster and panic didn't realize we don't need to do this. I think the first big mistake we made with Katrina was to evacuate people all over the country and put them in trailer parks. We had, within weeks, enough dry land that was supplied with electricity and water that we could have put thousands of people in trailer camps in the city of New Orleans, and it would have made a big difference to the initial recovery of the city. But instead, those trailer camps were spread all over the country. Those people in those camps in Nevada and Dallas and Houston couldn't start the process of rebuilding the city. And it was a big mistake.
So, Michelle, I saw you just shaking your head in agreement a lot, I assume, with what he was saying?
Yeah, because even though I wasn't there, but my family was in the Superdome. And they was telling me about what was going on and everything. How they was holding about the food and all that. They wasn't giving them the food. And I said, well, what they holding the food for? I said, ain't no need in holding the food. Let everybody eat. Mm-hmm. You know? And just with the buses, they wasn't letting the people use the buses. They were sitting there just being contaminated. They ain't even used to let people use the buses to get the people out of there.
So do you think that out of this we have learned any lessons in terms of how, first of all, we need to pay attention to the fact that people, particularly those who are poor, who are disenfranchised already, that we need to make sure that we have ways to take care of them in disasters like that? Reverend Tyree?
The one-word answer would be no.
Yeah, right.
If we were to look at Hampton Roads, for example, and we know that hurricane season starts June 1st and goes through, I believe it's the end of November. Mm-hmm. If you were to look at the maps that talk about the devastation that would be if a Category 3 or 4 hit this area, the highest point of ground, I think, is somewhere around the Greenbrier area in Chesapeake, which means that everything else would roughly be underwater. I think, for the most part, people believe that perhaps maybe the government on some level is organized to that extent to be able to have the resources, both human and material, to put together a plan for everybody that's concerned. I think families need to have plans for how family will connect with other family members should something happen. Right. That there ought to be in large assemblies, a church, a synagogue, a community center, some sort of evacuation plan that's posted where people can say, this is where we will meet should something take place. We're seeing more and more, not just with natural disasters, but just with the human condition and people doing random acts of violence, where those kinds of foresight and thinking need to take place and not put the onus on the government to be able to do that. If you know that there's a population of elderly people, then there needs to be some network where people can check on the elderly to make sure that during hot seasons, when air conditioning is prone to run out, that they don't die from heat stroke or heat exhaustion. During cold season, that people using space heaters don't die from carbon monoxide poisoning or things like that. There needs to be some sort of network to check in on those things. That needs to happen in conjunction with the government, but don't just leave all of the responsibility on state or local government to do it, because it just won't happen.
This won't happen. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina with Michelle Peters and Jeremy Dillon, both former residents of New Orleans and survivors of Hurricane Katrina, and Pastor William Tyree III, pastor of First Baptist Church, Berkley, one of the many churches in our area to assist families who were displaced after the storm. You know, I keep hearing in my mind and remembering watching the people, Ray Nagin and others saying, we need help. You guys have got to come down here and help us. You know, I wonder how you all feel about the fact that because this was the majority of the damage was being done in the 9th Ward. I wonder if you two can talk to us about the makeup of the 9th Ward and what it was about prior to Katrina. And how the government treated the 9th Ward prior to Katrina. Can you talk about that in terms of who lived there, what was going on there in terms of the economy, what was happening in that area?
Well, we pretty much we live neighborly, you know. We all, and where I was staying at, and from where I was staying at before, we always live neighborly. You know, we got along. That's important, because you don't never know who you're gonna need. So the life we lived there, it was pretty good. We didn't have all the killing and stuff that going on, killing and all that and stealing that went on, but it wasn't going on as bad as it is now. So the life we was living there was pretty decent. Yeah. And
in the 9th Ward, it had all types of socioeconomic levels. Is that right? In other words, because the media presented it as if everybody that lived in the lower 9th Ward was dirt poor. That's the way it was presented in the media. Is that true?
Well, not all true. I say it like this. If the individual themselves, how should I put this? If you want to make it, you gotta economize. You gotta economize on what you're doing.
So in other words, it was a working class neighborhood.
Yeah,
correct.
So if you just say you want to get your child this pair of shoes, you got to sacrifice and get them shoes. You know, I don't mean go steal, go rob or something like that. If you you got to save up some money, work to get it. You know, like that. And that's pretty much how I would do it. You know.
Well, was there resentment, do you think, as you talk to people who you know who still live there, that when people talk about the fact that the French Quarter, for example, came back to life a lot faster than
it did.
Than the 9th Ward, as an example. Is there resentment about that, Jeremy?
Yeah, it did. It came back to life. Like when I went to go visit last year, I saw a lot of like changes there. I seen new buildings being brought up. When I walked to school or anything, like they had like beside the sidewalk, they had like this wooded area that's gone, and they're building some like trailer parks, I believe, right there. The center of the median, the roads that have new like palm trees or something like that, and like in West Wego, not West Wego, on the West Bank.
The West Bank.
Yeah, on the West Bank. They were building new houses and stuff like that, and like it looks a lot different now.
And when we asked Councilman Gray about the French Quarter, he says, "Well, it came back because it never flooded there."
It did, but it didn't flood that much. You had like about 2 or 3 inches of water, you know, on the floor, which they could suffice that, you know, clean that up or redo their floors. It's not like as if you was in the lower 9. You know, it's a category 5. It's water over our houses. You know, nothing that couldn't be, that you could get nothing out of. We couldn't get nothing because everything was ruined. So it did flood there. It just, he wasn't looking at it like it flooded in the lower 9. He looking at it just like that's a little water, okay? But it didn't get damaged that much at all.
Looking from the outside, Reverend Tyree, looking in, 10 years, do you see progress in terms of rebuilding if you're just looking from the outside in?
I guess it all depends on how we measure and monitor progress. I think what they've cited in terms of some of maybe the popular touristic areas might receive more funds and resources than maybe some of the other areas that are more residential and that might affect a certain thing. I'd like to go back to your previous question, though, and kind of weigh in on that, if I may.
Absolutely.
I'm not a politician. I've never worked in city management or anything like that. But one thing I do know, that any kind of event, whether it's intentional or unintentional, will serve to bring out the best and the worst in people. The best is when people decide we're going to go down there and help to do something. Part of the worst is, how do we handle the best if there's no plan to making sure that the people get in the right places, transportation to get them there? If there's no plan to manage duplication of services, you can end up with tons of well-meaning canned goods resources going someplace that ends up stored somewhere and never gets used because nobody knew how to manage those resources.
And how to
that
actually
came
get
in.
it to the people who needed it.
I'm not familiar with the layout of New Orleans and the different wards. I am familiar with Hampton Roads. We have 7 cities. So if a major disaster comes, you have cities that will be vying for and organizing and rallying to support an individual city as opposed to regional government. And so those cities that may be more organized or more resourced than others will have a different response and a reaction than those cities that are less resourced or organized. And that's the unfortunate part about it, because people are people regardless as to where they are and affected where they are. And in Hampton Roads, very rarely do you find people who live, work, and worship in the same city. They go across these borders. And so if the region is not set up to work that way, then there needs to be some dissolution of individual city management and let some sort of regional force take over that can look with a set of unbiased eyes and make assessments on how we can best proactively address the issue for the betterment of all of the citizens in the region.
And we've also got to make sure that we pay attention and take care of the entire population, because money matters.
It does. It makes a big difference.
It makes a huge difference. Let's listen to what Councilman Gray had to say about his perception of the changes that have happened in New Orleans.
The lower 9 certainly is not doing as well as it was doing 10 years ago, the day before the flood. It was the hardest hit part of our city, and as you may expect, it has been the slowest part of the city in recovering. There's a lot of work left to be done. If you ask me, what do I see for the future, I think it's going to be great. We're moving at a good pace. We're in the middle of spending about $45 million on roads in the lower 9. We just completed a $20 million community center, a fire station that was about $5 million. The school system will finish in January, a $37 million high school. We had a groundbreaking Friday for a new CVS. We've started construction on a $2 million retail center. There's a lot going on for many people very late, and I agree with that assessment. But right now we're on the move, and we hope that movement will continue. I've surveyed the work on the levees. I think the Corps of Engineers have done a great job. Levees that were built by farmers 150 years ago have been replaced by the best engineering minds in this country and in the world. I anticipate the lower 9 is going to not only return to what it was, it's going to be better.
Okay. He's pretty optimistic. What do you think, Jeremy? Would you go back?
I wouldn't want to. I would go back to like to visit, but like how I see it, I'm growing up, like a little older. I don't want to be in like one place. I like since I came up here, I noticed like there's other things out there. So
you have no desire to go back there to live, mainly because you were young then, and you want to explore more of the United States. Okay.
Yeah, like because when I first came up here, I wanted to go back. I did like I wanted to go back because like all these new people coming up to me at school, it was like, "Oh, you from Katrina." I'm sorry. I got tired of that. I got really tired of that.
You know, I was going to ask you, what was it like adjusting? Because I want to get from a child's perspective and then from an adult's perspective, because it must have been a lot. You had the storm, but then you had also to deal with new
Yeah, I left
new people.
my friends. They went to other places and everything. When I came up here, I was like, I don't want to be here. The teachers are talking to me and everything, like, I need you to do this and this and this and this. And then it's got to be due next week. I'm like, I want to go home. No, you want to go home? I'm going to go back to New Orleans. And, like, the counselors that was at the school, they had, like, a group session. I think they had, like, 2 or 3 other students that were there. And I was the only one that stayed because my mom didn't want to leave. So it was hard to adjust. I'm a people person because people just like they're just like, "Hi, my name is this." I'm like, I just want to be alone right now. Leave me alone. But I had to adjust for the better good. So
after a while, you just got
used to it.
Just got used to it.
Just got over it and be like, I'm not going nowhere.
Do you like living here now?
I mean, it's decent. It's decent. I like
Ringing
it.
endorsement.
I like it. I like it. Made a lot of friends. I made a lot of friends. Finished high school, college, working. I like it, but don't want to be here that long.
Okay. Yeah. What was it like for you, Michelle?
Pretty much what Jeremy said, but it grew on us. Day to day, we just dealing with different things, and then my daughter, I really don't think she really accepted a lot of stuff because.
So you came, your husband came.
My daughter and my 2 granddaughters.
And your 2 granddaughters, okay.
Yes, so
okay.
We gradually just got immune to, but the people up here, you in New Orleans, we used to say, good morning, good evening, you have a good day. Up here, you say good morning, they look at you like,
it's so rude.
Where you come from? Then I'm a person. When I get my hair fixed, I keep my rollers until I get ready to take them out. Oh. When I get it fixed on a Friday, I take them out Sunday morning going to church. Look at me strange and say, oh, she going with them rollers in her hair.
So the customs are different.
And I look and say, good morning. And keep it rolling. You know what I'm saying? So it's just, you got to get accustomed. We've really got accustomed to it up here. But I like it.
So I love living here.
Yeah, I'm not
Was it
going
hard
back.
Learning how to get around?
Oh, yes,
so
Lord, because I ain't no interstate person. No, flat on the ground.
How about the tunnels?
I don't go to tunnels. Drive no tunnels. Nah, I don't even like them. But if my daughter drives them, if I be in a vehicle with her and she drives through there, it's okay. So other than that.
How old were your grandchildren when they relocated?
Maja was 2 and Melina was 3.
Okay, so they really don't remember.
No.
In terms of this has always been home.
This always been home.
Been home for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
That they've described 2 different perspectives and almost the same perspective of the human condition, though. Jeremy was young enough to be homesick, but yet now, in retrospect, looking at new possibilities and different things. Mrs. Peters, 10 years ago, was able to make that adjustment. Let's look at the senior citizens or the people who all of their life and energy has gone into home ownership, making this place our place, who don't have the energy or the desire to want to start over from scratch. On the surface, we can say, yes, you need to relocate because a storm is coming. Which is worse, to die in a storm or to die a slow death having to rebuild, meet new friends,
Yes.
get established all over again.
Right.
And unfortunately, because this area is such a transient area because of military, we're constantly used to an influx and exodus of people. So we're less sensitive to how we can better meet the needs of people who are here not by choice, but by force, and how we can help them adjust culturally, socially, economically, mentally, physically, spiritually, and address the issues of the whole person, not just the material part, but the other intangible aspects of what it means to be a human being and a person living in America and at the same time displaced. Because what we haven't talked about,
I was going to ask you about that,
is what we did here. People being referred to as refugees, as opposed to displaced Americans. And seeing the images of looting, some folk would categorize that one way, as opposed to seeing the outcry of desperation because of the human condition that is now suffering because there's no organized system of management and addressing the needs of a person. Those are things that oftentimes get overlooked because it deals with the rehumanization of a person once something like that has taken place in their life.
And when you displace people also, and they don't have they didn't have means to begin with, and they still don't have means once they're put into a brand new environment, then they've got everything to have to deal with all over again. And so that's a lot. I want to ask you also, in terms of feeding the spiritual soul, as you go through this situation, how did you help people to be able to, and I want to hear your response to this too. Did you have moments, and you as a pastor, how did you help people get through moments of maybe doubt or frustration when you would say, from a spiritual level, why is this happening? Why did I have to come here? Why did I have to go through this? Or did you ask that question?
Not in so many words, because like I said, Reverend Tolliver and the church, well, before that, when we was at my mother-in-law's house, we had to go there. I was just thinking when we was going back home. That's all I was thinking about. When we was going back home, we're not going to be here this long. And my mother-in-law, she'll tease me, tell me, she said, now, Michelle, any other time you're packed for like 2 weeks and you're here on the weekend. So I said, okay, we're going back home. So, lost my thought.
I was just asking, did you have a question?
So
God? Or your faith during this time?
I know I was praying. That's for one thing. I really was praying. And to see how we was going to figure out what we was going to do, how we was going to go about doing it, until my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law came into town by my mother-in-law, and they was telling us, they talked to my husband in there, and told him that Reverend Tolliver wanted to know if any of our relatives want to come up, and they'll put us up for 6 months. He told them no. And so when I got the message, my sister-in-law told me, she said, well, we'll say he's not going. I said, oh, wait a minute, hold up. I said, hold up, wait a minute. I said, what did he say? We'll say he's not going. I say, first of all, we don't have nowhere to go. Mama used to stay in the house by herself. Mm-hmm. And we got to get to a phone so we can start our get things started and see what's going on with our place and insurances and talk to people like that.
So you found the blessing there. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're just about out of time.
Okay.
Believe me. I want to give you a chance very quickly, Reverend Tyree, to answer that question, how you help people that way spiritually.
Well, we understand that, first of all, that the first reaction is going to be shock. Mm-hmm. And when a person is in shock, they don't need words. They need
help,
presence, and ministry in that way. Then from shock to sorrow, dealing with the reality that loss has set in. A person in reality will go through the stages of grief, even denial, or thinking that this is just temporary. I'm going to be able to go back.
Right.
And helping them come through anger and blame and bargaining and negotiating until finally there's that acceptance. Person needs to understand that, needs to also be able to know how to identify the signs in another person and the signs in themselves, where it's not a false faith but a genuine faith. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes when you go through, there is a means to be able to get through. Mm-hmm. When you recognize that struggle is going to be a process and surrender is a process, and then you don't want your pain to be wasted because God can use that to minister to somebody else. But people have to be navigated through all of that. And wise men and women of faith need to understand that when stuff happens, as opposed to respond in a platitudinal, shorter way.
We are out of time. You guys have been fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us as we look at this. And thank you so much for your wisdom, Reverend Tyree. I really appreciate it. So Michelle Peters and Jeremy Dillon and Reverend William Tyree. And I just want to take a moment to talk very quickly about Wednesday, because another tragic murder happened, and it really hit close to home, because it was the murder of 2 journalists and the wounding of an interview subject at the hands of a disgruntled former colleague. Many of you may know the majority of my professional career has been in TV news management, and I can tell you that the bond among television news teams is strong. It has to be. The hours are long, the pressure is great, and many times only your colleagues can understand what you go through to be the very best that you can be. And that's why this is particularly heartbreaking for journalists on so many levels. So on behalf of the Another View production team, we extend our deepest sympathy to the families of Allison Parker, Adam Ward, and the WDBJ 7 News family. And we also wish a very speedy recovery for Vicki Gardner. And a community note of interest, Restoration Christian Fellowship in Norfolk is hosting its second community forum, Juvenile Delinquency, Criminal Justice, and the Church's Role. Mayor Paul Frame, NRHA Commissioner Alberto Albert, and other community leaders will lead a community discussion. Everyone is invited to attend. It is Monday, August 31st at 6 p.m. Restoration Christian Fellowship, East Little Creek Road in Norfolk, and rcfchurch.net for more information. Next week, a brand new initiative for Another View called Race, Let's Talk About It. We'll tell you all about it. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Kamaria Mason was going to answer our phones. I'm Barbara Hamley. Make it a fantastic weekend, everyone. Let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.